All right, today we're going to talk about a really surprising connection between two things that, on the surface, seem to have nothing to do with each other. I'm talking about those personality tests you find all over the internet and the super complex theories of Sigmund Freud. I know, it sounds like a weird mashup, but trust me, by the end of this, you'll see how they're both secretly running on the exact same psychological engine.
So take a look at this quote. You have a tendency to be critical of yourself. While you have some personality weaknesses, you are generally able to compensate for them. Read that again. Does that ring a bell? Does it feel like it's talking directly to you? Just hang on to that feeling for a minute.
It's a weirdly specific feeling, isn't it? That little jolt you get when your daily horoscope or some random online quiz just seems to get you perfectly. That's the big mystery we're diving into. How in the world do they do that? What's the trick?
Okay, to figure that out, we've got to start by putting a name to this whole phenomenon. It's officially called the Barnum effect, and it's basically a cognitive bias, a little quirk in our brains that makes us fall for personality descriptions that feel super personal, but are actually so vague and general they could apply to almost anyone. Yep, it's named after the circus guy, P.T. Barnum, who famously said his shows had a little something for everybody. Makes sense, right?
So, how does this little magic trick actually work? Well, it really boils down to three key ingredients. First, the statements are super ambiguous. They leave a ton of room for you to fill in the blanks with your own life. Second, they're usually pretty positive. And hey, who doesn't like to hear nice things about themselves? And finally, they tap right into this deep human need we all have for validation. We just want to feel like someone out there sees us and understands us.
So, okay, now we know what the Barnum effect is, but that's just scratching the surface. To really get why it's so incredibly powerful, we need to bring in a pretty unexpected guest to our little party. Sigmund Freud.
And this is really the most important question, isn't it? I mean, it's one thing to say, oh yeah, vague statements work, but why? What is actually happening inside our heads that makes us so vulnerable to this stuff? What's the engine really running this whole operation?
Well, according to Freud, our minds are basically a constant war zone. You've got the id, which is all your raw, primal instincts screaming, I want it now! Then you have the superego, which is like your inner parent, your moral conscience, saying, nope, you can't do that. And smack dab in the middle is the poor ego, that's your conscious self, just trying to play referee and find a compromise. And that constant negotiation, that's the key to, well, pretty much everything.
All right, so let's see how this all plays out in the real world. We're going to look at a couple of classic examples that really show how Freud's ideas can explain the crazy power of the Barnum effect.
Check this out. This is a classic Barnum statement from an actual experiment. Your sexual adjustment has presented problems for you. Whoa! It's incredibly vague, right? But for so many people, a statement like that just hits like a ton of bricks. It feels so true. But why?
Here's what Freud would say. He'd argue that the horoscope isn't actually telling you anything. It's just a blank screen. It's there for you to project your own stuff onto it. Think of it like a Rorschach blot, but made out of words. It's just a meaningless shape until you decide what it looks like.
So here's how that process actually works, step by step. You read that vague statement, immediately your ego, the mediator we just talked about, goes into overdrive, scanning your entire brain for a personal connection. It latches on to your own private worries, your secret fears about your relationships or who you are, and it just projects them right onto that sentence. And suddenly, bam, the horoscope feels like it was written just for you. But really, you did all the heavy lifting yourself.
Okay, let's take another one we've all seen, the online personality test. You answer a bunch of questions, and it spits out a result like, you are a diplomatic idealist. And you read the description, and you're like, whoa, that's me to a T. But let's put on our Freudian glasses for a second and see what's really going on.
This whole thing connects directly to Freud's theory of dreams. The test result, that shiny, diplomatic idealist label, is what Freud would call the manifest content. It's just the simple story you see on the surface. But your real life, with all its messy, complicated memories, fears, and hopes, that's the latent content. That's the true, complex reality hiding just underneath the label.
And the reason this works so ridiculously well is because of a Freudian idea called condensation. A simple phrase like strong inner world becomes this giant container. It can hold all your secret fantasies, your private heartbreaks, every opinion you've never said out loud. So when you read feeling misunderstood, your brain instantly fills that container with that one fight you had with your mom, your anxiety about work, that romantic frustration. The label feels so precise because you're the one filling it with your own very specific, very personal stuff.
And at the end of the day, we buy into these labels because they're a form of wish fulfillment. Let's be honest, we want a simple, neat, and usually flattering story about who we are. It just feels so much better to think of yourself as a diplomatic idealist than to face the messy, chaotic truth of what's actually going on in your head. That right there is what Freud called the pleasure principle in action. We'll take the comfortable story every time.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together now. It's time to connect all the dots.
Here's the main idea in a nutshell. Ambiguity is the bridge. It's the vagueness, the lack of specifics in a horoscope or personality test that swings the door wide open for that powerful Freudian engine of projection to fire up and get to work.
To put it another way, the Barnum effect is the what? It's the phenomenon of us finding deeply personal meaning in these generic statements. But Freudian theory gives us the why. It explains the mechanism. Our conscious ego is actively taking all our unconscious baggage and plastering it all over those vague phrases to make sense of the world and ourselves.
Now, it's fair to say there are two ways to interpret this whole connection. A skeptic might look at this and say, hey, isn't Freudian analysis just a really fancy, sophisticated version of the Barnum effect itself? A kind of psychological cold reading? And that's a valid critique. But, on the other hand, a defender would argue that Freud did more than just point out the trick. He actually gave us a whole system for understanding the content of what we project, all those specific fears, desires, and conflicts that make us who we are.
And all of this leaves us with one last, pretty deep question to chew on. The power of the Barnum effect, especially when you look at it through Freud's eyes, really says something profound about us as people. It makes you wonder, when we're trying to figure ourselves out, are we really searching for the truth? Or are we just looking for a good story, one that makes us feel comfortable and understood? Do we genuinely prefer a simple, neat label over the messy, complicated, maybe even terrifying, but also liberating reality of our own unknown minds? Definitely something to think about.